Chances are this is the first video on my channel. So, cool, congratulations, you're a founder, or some fun stuff like that. I just got done recording the video and realized it's 43 minutes long. And while by no means it's the first video I've ever made, it's definitely the first time I'm gonna try and put actual effort, and especially into something so long, so any constructive criticism or feedback on how I can make future videos better would be greatly appreciated. But that all being said, subscribe, or don't do it yet. Let me earn your subscription. But that being said, hope you enjoy the video. Hi there, let's go back in time a bit, shall we? The year is 2010. The internet is first popping off on YouTube to the point where people are able to make very frequent livings on the site. However, despite this, there's one genre of content that seems to be popping off the hardest, and that is gaming content. Big names like Markiplier, PewDiePie, and Jacksepticeye were born in this era, and with them came a bunch of new forms of media. More specifically, the horror gaming Let's Play, which is just such an ancient mystery nowadays, huh? It was around this time big names in the video gaming world franchise like Awoni, Corpse Party, Slender the 8 Pages, and who the hell could forget the juggernaut that was Five Nights at Freddy's finally came into the light and were celebrated by tons and tons of people. Because in this far gone era of 2014, the internet was just not ready for the might of Five Nights at Freddy's. But I digress. With this new form of media, a ton of people were introduced to horror gaming as a concept, and a lot of people decided to go out on their own and make their own franchises to branch off into the media and try and snatch up some of that delicious attention. This ended up having a lot, and I do mean a lot, of cheap knockoff games that were very, very bland, boring, tasteless, empty open fields with one long monster at the end of it that would give you a quick jump scare and boom, that would be the end of the game. It got so bad that around the time in 2014, a ton of people ended up dropping horror media franchises, and this activated one neuron in an old game developer that you probably haven't heard of. This game developer's name was Akumakura, aka the creator of my favorite game of all time. He saw some of these old jump scare cheapo games and got frustrated with the concept that horror was now synonymous with jump scares, which are cheap and stupid because nobody is actually getting scared because some real effort went in. The only reason why people are getting scared is because when it gets really quiet and really dark and suddenly there's a thing with a noise, people get shocked. I mean, it's the cheapest cheap get. And Kira, frustrated with the idea, came up with a joke game where he made a small room where you walked in it for a few minutes and then all of a sudden a piece of cardboard jumped at you and made a noise. He ended up loving the concept so much he fleshed it out into one of my favorite horror games of all time, complete with all sorts of references to previous horror media and franchises. That game, you've probably heard of it. It's called Spooky's House of Jump Scares, and in my opinion, this is one of the greatest horror games ever made. Now, don't get me wrong, Spooky's House of Jump Scares isn't necessarily one of the scariest things ever made. It's more so intriguing, it's a slow-burning experience. It disguises itself as cute and cuddly, and the longer you progress throughout the 1,000 floors of the mansion, the more dark and disturbing things get. You'll eventually find chibi cardboard cutouts of demons and ghouls, and then you find Satan in Arby's, which is the most terrifying thing ever. But if that's not enough for you, and you finish the whole game and beat it 100%, you can experience the DLCs, like the Caramari Hospital, which is just a beautifully mortifying experience, or you could go play the Dollhouse DLC, which puts a nice little bow on the story while being horrifying. However, in this specific video, I don't want to talk about the DLC. I only want to talk about the mainline game. And I say that because, while yes, the DLC content is incredibly cool and it's very nice to go through it, they were made after the developer worked on a different game known as Lost in Vivo. That's right, Lost in Vivo was made by the same guy, which is just incredible. Like, that's a huge deal. If you've ever heard of Lost in Vivo, you know why that's so impressive. So when he ended up making the Caramari Hospital and Dollhouse editions of the game, they are significantly more terrifying than everything else because the man had way more experience. And don't get me wrong, that is cool, but I don't want to talk about all that. I'd rather talk about the charm that the first 1,000 room portion of the game had. Of course, if there is mild interest in this video, I will obviously go over the Dollhouse DLC and Caramari Hospital because I do love those editions of the game, but for now, I just want to talk about this because this was my childhood, and I owe it to Spookies to at least discuss it because this is the reason why I have such a huge fixation on horror media as an adult. and I really want to talk about this, so if you're interested, by all means, join me while we talk about the greatest horror game that you have never heard of for some reason, you godless bastard. Unlike most horror games that throw you in the shitter as soon as you start playing the game, Spooky's is very different. It starts off cute and cuddly. You're introduced to this large, looming house in the background as the title screen, while, assuming that's your first time opening the game, you're introduced to some quick lore about it. I'm not going to spoil what it says, but I am going to spoil everything else, because I'm going to be honest, I don't really care about the opening cutscene. Nothing really interesting is said there. All it tells you is there's this big derelict house on a mansion, and you go to explore it. So, as soon as you press start, you begin. You're introduced to a small room with a staircase on each side, as well as the main antagonist of the series, Spooky. Spooky, as you can see here, is adorable, and she has no threatening disposition whatsoever. Spooky is the main antagonist, and it's heavily implied she has a lot of lore behind her, but at this point in the game, you won't know anything about that. All you know is she tells you, hey, welcome to my house, you son of a bitch. Our security systems are very top tier, and now you need to walk through 1,000 rooms instead of walking out the door you just entered through. So of course, you begin. And things start out normally. There's no real things that really occur. Now, as I said earlier, there are monsters in the game. We call them specimens, and they will appear as you progress. But at the very beginning, it starts off cuddly and cute. It lures you into this false sense of security, which was the first horror game that I think did it as well as Spooky did. It was because of this slow burn that it intrigued a lot of players, because Steam didn't say anything about how horrifying the game was. At the time of release, Steam only had a few screenshots of the cuter aspects of the game. And it will continue like this for a while. You'll go through empty room after empty room, occasionally getting jump scared by a piece of cardboard. And this cardboard is our first specimen. This is Specimen One. Specimen One is a piece of cardboard that only jumps out from the side, and he'll make a loud noise. And as a matter of fact, they're the only jump scare faction of this game. There's no other character in Spooky's House of Jump Scares that will properly jump scare you aside from Specimen One. In the game, the developer of the game, Kira, he knows that jump scares are cheap and stupid and nobody really likes them. So, as a beautiful analogy, he made the only thing that jump scares you cardboard, because it's cheap and stupid. Now, the things that it'll jump scare you with do change as the game progresses. Typically, it gets more and more violent as the game goes on, but at the start of the game, most things that jump scare you are just going to be very cute slimes and skeletons with a little bit of a smiley face, and I think that's really cool. Of course, it doesn't stay like this for long. Once you get to room 60, you're introduced to the first major enemy of the game, Specimen Two. As you can tell by his design, Specimen 2 is a very gooey, slimy creature with bones and teeth. And he's actually based off of a pop culture character. If you've ever heard of the show Adventure Time, there's an episode where they introduced the Lubglubs. Specimen 2 is based after a Lubglub, and he chases you very slowly, occasionally spawning in little puddles on the floor. And he has a death animation. I'm not going to read what it says, because it's going to be cringy as shit if I do, but it is very cool. It's a very high quality monster for a very first encounter. Now, of course, he's not threatening at all. He's, I think, half the speed of the player. It takes some time for him to spawn once he gets into a room, and once you get the axe halfway through the game, you can just chop him into gooey bits every single time he shows up. He's not threatening, but his first disposition as a monster in the game is interesting because, as I said earlier, he's the first true threat, and after you're finished with him with the first time, it is very likely that you will see him again as you progress through the game as specimens start going through the cycle, and it's very possible in other game modes like Endless, his goops, while not being threatening because of him, will become a major issue because, they slow you down. And if they slow you down, then that gives openings for other specimens to get the grip on you, which is very interesting. He's more of a supportive monster. Of course, in the main game, this will never happen. Eventually, once you escape Specimen 2, you'll find your way into a building called the Geo Labs. Geo Labs is around floor 100, maybe 110, 120, I don't fully remember, but it's after 100. Once you get to the Geo Labs, you're introduced to the first special specimen location, which will become a staple later on. Every specimen has their own series of rooms, which do not count towards the progression of level, but they do count towards the game as a whole, and they add a lot to the game through little lore notes you'll find throughout the building. Specimen 3, if you go to the left, pick up a key, you can go to the right, and you'll find some broken test tubes and a note. The note tells a story of how we are containing this giant monster that's growing at a rapid rate, and they don't have the chemicals they need to properly sedate it. They ask Spooky for help, to which she laughs in their face and flies away, because fuck those losers. And then eventually, you are told about another scientist who can hear the sounds of clicking. Well, it is scripted once you pick up this note, you will hear clicking sounds, and if you look up fast enough, you will see Specimen 3. I'm gonna go right off the bat and say for anybody with arachnophobia, you might want to look away. Specimen 3 is a giant spider-like centipede hybrid monster that chases you down with unreal speed and kills you with infectious poisonous bites. I'm not gonna try and give you the reference for what Specimen 3 is about actually, according to the Wikipedia on the game, a lot of people think that Specimen 3 is a reference to Resident Evil, which he's not. Kira, in an interview, made a comment about Specimen 3 when he asked how did he model Specimen 3, how did he come up with the idea of Specimen 3, and Kira replied that he just had an art class where he had to model a creature with moving parts, and he thought the idea of a giant bug spider monster was cool. So I don't think that's true. It very well might be because they lay reference to it, but I don't think that's the case. Doesn't really matter though, because Specimen 3 is by far one of the most interesting characters in the game, and I say this because in the original game, Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion, he was not threatening at all. He was slower than Goop, he looked stupid, he had a huge upgrade when he went to the 3D version of the game, because A, instead of being a 2D piece of paper that was slow, he was now a giant 3D centipede that's faster than the player character if you don't outrun him, which is very hard to do, and he can ambush you from holes he makes in the ceiling. Not only that, but Specimen 3 has a new special death animation, which is just incredible. I'll play it on screen now, you can see it in the background. Specimen 3 by far got one of the biggest glow-ups in the game, and when you see him on the rechase cycle, he'll bust down the doors instead of opening them to actively chase you down, which makes him that much more terrifying. And of course, much like every other creature in the game, you have no way of fighting back. Once you get the axe, you can hit Specimen 3 in the head and make him retreat for a few seconds, but it's highly advised you don't do this because, again, just run, don't face down death, you're not gonna win. Eventually, though, he will let up, and when he does, you'll be introduced to the next specimen on the list, Specimen 4. However, I am not a vor enthusiast, unlike my guest here. How should I introduce you?
You should tell them how fucking smart and cool I am. Specimen 4 is the Oni-chan of your hentai fantasies, and she has skin complexions comparable to that of the average gamer. Now, before you unzip your trouser serpent for a very long and steamy playdate, it is in my best interest to inform you that Ringu, as she's called in the files, is actually based off the man-eater from Corpse Party. Now, for some of you, that might be a bit of a turnoff, unless you're into vor. The place where we first encounter Ringu is comparable to that of an Indian school system. You can tell it's an Indian school because it's fucking empty. Now, some of you may be saying that this is a Chicago school system, but I'm sensing a distinct lack of bullet holes for that to be the case. Now, while some of you may argue that this place is uninteresting at a glance, that might be because your glance is limited to roughly 60% of what's actually on screen. However, if you're willing to look past, or rather forward, the lack of peripheral vision, you'll come to find that this place has a little bit more to offer. With rooms full of all the aspirations of the mentality of children whose hopes and dreams were crushed by the school system, you'll also find some pretty terrifying notes that just so happen to talk about all the brutal ways children were murdered within the halls of the establishment. Allegedly, of course. Now, if you manage to make it through the pants-filling experience that is this location, you will eventually bump into the perpetrator of all these heinous actions. That, of course, being Ringu. My lawyers are currently telling me to refer to this as Specimen 4, but since this is a court of law, I'm not going to do that.
Fuck you!
Now, I know you may be getting a little sleepy right now from Soul's lack of editing skills.
Oh my god, why did I invite you?
So in order to help alleviate that, Ringu will start playing a lovely little lullaby. Turn around and it's at this point the chase begins, and much like a lot of the older specimens, there's really not much different going on here. Ringu is the first of many specimens that will actually start clipping through walls. Also, in endless mode, when she does get close to you, she'll start changing forms. Granted, she does do that in the original mode as well, but that's mostly limited to her jaw unhinging, so she can get ready to scoop your flabby ass right into the lovely confines. She eats you. She just eats you. And when she does, you get a nice little shot of her bulging belly and her holding it, and I am very uncomfortable right now. Is this it? Is this what you needed?
That's all I needed. You can leave now.
Alright, cool.
Moving on. After you deal with Specimen 4, you manage to get away from her after countless rooms of levitating and wall shifting, you will eventually be introduced to the next specimen on our list, Specimen 5. Now, if it's not very obvious by his very alluring details, Specimen 5 is based off of the Silent Hill series of games. This is a fact that is really driven home throughout the point of the game, especially through the design, as he has the weapon of Pyramid Head and being some weird hybrid of bubble-headed nurses and the mannequins. Specimen 5, unlike every other creature in the game, has eldritch undertones and, again, a very unique location. You walk into this gridded, run-down, eerie hospital with a thick fog rolling through the area. The sounds of your feet echo along the floor as you approach the first door. Open it, and you're introduced to a variety of different rooms. Some of them have notes talking about sacrifices, some of them are prison cells, some of them have keys, and the most cursed one, just look at it. Yeah, it's pretty fucked. I don't think I want to talk about this anymore, but if you keep going long enough, eventually you will find the specimen itself. Waiting for you at the end of a long hallway is a gate that opens up, revealing Specimen 5, who will chase you down with the pace of a very old grandma. He doesn't actually aggro you like most other specimens do, opting instead to change the area around you into frightening and disheartening imagery in order to make you go psycho. Now, this is again a reference to Silent Hill, which I won't talk about because that's potential spoilers if you haven't played this 30-year-old game, but it's a very, very interesting aspect. It's not at all unique, as a lot of later specimens will use psychological manipulation to turn you against them, but this is still very cool this early in the game. And this marks the list where the specimens get really good, because you have to keep in mind, the developer of the game, Kira, was making these specimens as he went. The game did not release full, it released in bits and pieces. And from this point, they get really interesting, such as Specimen Six. Riding off of the coattails of Specimen 5, you will eventually enter into this weird dungeon-like area as a very old retro gaming aesthetic with a very low droning tune that echoes throughout the entire dungeon. You can go through the left and right and find notes detailing the tale of an old merchant who sold puppets and trinkets and toys to these little kids, and eventually the other merchants ended up getting so envious of this that they gathered up all of the merchant's toys and trinkets in the middle of the night before throwing them into the river, causing the merchant to run to the river screaming that his children were drowning before jumping in after them, only to never resurface. Later on, puppets and trinkets started being found around the village that had the shape of children that went missing recently. If it's not obvious, the merchant and these children are linked. Flash forward in the maze, we will eventually run into Specimen 6 himself. He is obviously, with just a quick glance, a reference to creepypasta lore. More specifically, a reference to Ben Drowned. For those of you that don't know what Ben Drowned is, you're probably way too young to be watching this video, but it's an old story about a Ben who drowned. I know, incredible, right? And he haunts a video game cartridge. Well, Specimen 6 is a puppet, much like the poor victims he has, and he will chase you down in Weeping Angels fashion, meaning whenever you don't look at him, he moves at blinding speed, and you are notified whenever he moves through the sound of puppet clicking. Of course, this is not as easy as it sounds, because you also can't look at him for too long. If you look at him for more than 10 seconds at a time, he will just instantly teleport behind you, which can make him one of the most frustrating specimens in the game, because even if you follow his game mechanics, sometimes it's impossible to move faster than he is. And by the way, Specimen 6 does a ton of damage. However, there is something very interesting about this specimen, being he's the first one that you can't brute force run away from. The designer of the game, Kira, expressed that he was upset that people were constantly running away from the monster, never taking the time to turn and look at the things he had created. So he created Specimen 6 as a way to counter that. The only way to escape Specimen 6 is to look at him, to embrace the demon that he is. And if you look at him for too long, well, you get punished with a quick and swift hit. Now, make no mistake, Specimen 6 hits like a truck. It only takes 3 hits for him to kill you, so a lot of people don't realize his gimmick will run and dash and die. And Specimen 6 death screen, I'll just play it. It's pretty fucked up, as you can see from the background. I'm not going to play the audio, but if you could just imagine that if this is the first time you died in this otherwise cutesy game, it is enthralling. A lot of people get hooked in here, and this is actually where a lot of streamers died first. Eventually, of course, you will escape him if you lit on for his onslaught for long enough, and once you progress further into the game, you will get the axe, which makes mincemeat of this enemy. You can just smack him one time, he falls over, he's dead, you're done, you can move on with your life. And there we go. Once you escape Specimen 6, we're now at Specimen 7, easily one of the cooler ones in the game. Unlike everything that came before him, Specimen 7 at first seems non-hostile. You'll walk into a very weird room that has the borderline of consciousness, the wall will fall apart when you are introduced to the only living, non-hostile creature in the game, a cat. The cat will explain to you a bunch of interesting topics before dragging you from room to room, showing you these crazy psychological issues before talking about things like the mask you wear protects you, but it's best not to get lost in it, or something like that. It's very pretentious, and it will keep telling you these crazy things about how you better be ready to see what you'd rather not be, and it'll tell you about all these horrifying psychological concepts, obviously being a reference to therapy. How do we know it's therapy? Well, if you walk into the next room, you are introduced to a red, misty wall, and this giant skeleton flesh pit will run at you. Now, a lot of people think this is a reference to the wall of flesh from Terraria, but Kira has gone on record many times, and so has Wambu when during his interview, and he's actually referenced to Gygus from Earthbound, and if you know what Gygus is, the reference should have been obvious. He will chase you down very, very rapidly, and he will one-shot you. This is the only specimen in the game that one-shots you. He does not have a death screen unlike every other character, but he's a very interesting concept because he's slow. He is unbelievably slow. The only way you will die to Specimen 7 is if you stop, turn around, and fixate on him, which again is a reference to therapy. If you fixate on your problems, then they can become bigger issues than you are, rather than embracing them head on and escaping them. Now, of course, there is not much else to talk about, because aside from this one interesting fact, there's nothing. We have information from Katdos that'll tell us that he's some sort of psychological demon with higher effects and potency on people with issues, but that's about it. And that's because, aside from his design being a reference to Gygus, he's a completely original concept, which I really enjoy. Obviously, he's not my favorite specimen. That comes next when we talk about Specimen 8. The Deer Lord, easily one of the coolest specimens in the game. The room starts very, very simply. You walk into an open field. It's an autumn aesthetic, very, very mellow colors, yellows, oranges, and you will walk through this tree-wooded area. You will encounter some stone walls, and eventually you'll come across a log cabin. Enter into the log cabin, and you'll find a note from a man who came before you, talking about how he finally escaped the dreaded mansion. However, he's hungry, and he wants to kill some of the local deer for more food. Go into the next area, and you will find said deer. Now, if you approach them, they will charge at you at full speed and deal a shit ton of damage, obviously, more often than not, scaring people into running to the next log cabin. There you will find another note from the same guy who claims that those things were not deer, and that he wasn't able to kill one, and that they almost ate him, though he found an axe. Walk forward again, you'll find the axe, and this is a weapon you can keep for the rest of the game. You can even kill certain hostile mobs, such as the deer. You can kill the deer very quickly and move on with your life. Now, I don't suggest doing this, because chances are you're not going to be a good shot very early on, and you'll probably get fucked over and killed. But if you keep going, you'll find a bricked off room, break it open, walk forward, and you're introduced to this giant green silhouetted cave with symbols and runes along the sides, protective runes keeping something sealed within. Walk forward again, you'll find another sealed door. Now, most people, if they find a second sealed door, they know not to fuck with it, but you do it anyway, because fuck you, I'm a Giga Chad, and you step forward again to find a giant furry wrapped up in a cloak with the souls of screaming people within its cape. Now, obviously, this is Specimen 8. Specimen 8, or as I will further refer to as the Dear Lord, is a giant Ringu reskin, or at least he was. As of version whatever the hell the most recent one was, they updated Specimen 8 to be much more of a threat. Now Specimen 8 can open holes through dimensions and storm through them at rapid speed. Specimen 8 is the fastest enemy in the game because of this. If there is more than one wall between you and him, Specimen 8 will open a hole through a new dimension and will blitz through it at top speed, eventually catching up with you and dealing damage. If he hits you in this fashion, he will backtrack a little bit as to give you time to get away, which is always appreciated. Therefore, Specimen 8 plays a much more defensive role. You can't just run away from him, you have to stay relatively close to him, otherwise he will catch up to you with blinding speed. It is very frustrating, but also fair. Now, eventually, of course, you can get killed by him if you are too greedy. If you die to Specimen 8, you are instead teleported to this giant red oaked forest with the red trees and blood of those who have already been killed. You will walk forward and eventually find Specimen 8, 2 times the size he was before, with cloak open agape, ready to accept you into the souls of those who have already been killed. There you can see their screaming faces and join them, in which you are told a short poem. Now, I'm not going to read the poem again, you can see it on screen, pause it if you want, but it's a very interesting death. He is the first specimen in the whole game that when he kills you will carry you to another dimension, which is just incredible. I love this specimen, and I am clearly not the only one that likes Specimen 8 because he had a cameo in Kira's recent game, you've probably heard of it, Lost in Vivo. If you've never heard of Lost in Vivo, I'm surprised. Pyrocynical made a multi-hour long video about it, but there is a very brief Easter egg you can find in a rundown village, and in the middle of the village you can find a stone totem. If you pick up the totem and you walk downstairs, for a brief second, Specimen 8 will appear outside the window. Now, there is some lore behind Specimen 8. Specimen 8 is apparently a god amongst gods who are fighting for power over mortals, which is why Specimen 8 kills and indoctrinates people into his cloak. He's collecting souls to make himself more powerful. Of course, this is completely unrelated to Spooky. This has only happened years down the line, but I think it's very interesting that of all the specimens in Spooky's House of Jumpscares, Dear Lord is the only one to be continued to flesh out through other games, clearly showing some bias, and I appreciate that as my favorite. Moving on, we are now at Specimen 10. Now, this one I have some very tasteful opinions on, but I will save them for now. Specimen 10 is encountered into another version of the labs from earlier. If you remember, when I talked about Specimen 3, you encountered a laboratory-like system. This time, it's an older version of those labs. You'll find notes around the area telling you that we're looking for some sort of item, some valuable possession to bring back to Spooky. You'll walk through and the power will go out. You reset the power with a generator and you're eventually told you need to go into the vents. Go into the vents and you'll find notes of people talking about how they're being attacked by a specimen and there's extra growths forming on their flesh as blood and pus oozes throughout their body, slowly killing them. Keep traveling even further and you'll find the corpse of somebody else being dragged away through the vents. Keep going, and eventually you reach another room. Power goes out again. Before the power comes back on, you'll hear scratching and scraping. Go to the side, open the door, turn on the power, walk out, and you're introduced to the specimen. Now, I could talk about the cave worm, the giant black creature you'll probably see on screen for a second. That was the original incarnation of Specimen 10, but Kira decided fuck that thing and had it be killed by the older specimen, which is a fitting death because this is Specimen 10, also known as the Parasite. The Parasite is a very interesting specimen, unlike every other one, because he forces you to walk behind him. Not like how Dear Lord does, where if you don't walk slowly, he'll bolt through dimensions. No. If you run away from Specimen 10, he will turn into an earthworm and bolt towards you at blinding speeds. He is twice as fast as the player. If he attacks you, you will be blinded, you will be poisoned, you will have flesh grow throughout the corner of your eyes, and it will deal a significant amount of your HP. If he keeps attacking you, you will die, and there is nothing you can do about it. The only way to avoid this is to keep close to him, but not too close, because if you get too close, he will go from his flesh-wrapped body to a wide open gaping mouth with thousands of teeth ready to eat you whole, just because how dare you. Now, I'm gonna be 100% honest. I like Specimen 10 as a concept. I do not like Specimen 10 in gameplay. This is the most boring part of the entire game, and it's not even close. It doesn't help that you have to walk the whole time, but to make matters worse, he will have really long rooms, because I haven't mentioned this earlier, but every specimen comes with their own predetermined rooms, and it just so happens that 80% of Specimen 10's rooms are long as fuck, and it will take ages to get through one of his chases, and it does not help when on the rechase cycle you have to deal with him again. And unlike every other specimen like 2, 3, 6, and a few others, you can't just hit them with an axe and knock them over. No. You have to play around his mechanics, and it is so frustrating, especially on repeat playthroughs. If you're a lot like me, you've played this game so many times, you get sick of it because it just eats up time. It'll take about 30 minutes to get through his entire rotation, and it's frustrating. Once you do finally skip from him, we get to talk about my second favorite, or maybe favorite, specimen in the game, which is the Food Demon, also known as Specimen 11. Now, I'm going to be 100% honest right off the bat. My love of Specimen 11 100% comes from the posters around his room, and 0% comes from the actual specimen itself. For those of you who don't know, Specimen 11, like every other specimen, or most specimens I've talked about so far, has his very own unique room. It is a McDonald's-esque, Arby's-esque kind of room that has posters all over the place that say 100% real beef, or taste the beef. And in high school, when I was in 9th, 10th grade, it was the funniest shit to me and my friends to just walk into classes and be like, taste the beef, because we were just dumb like that. We were stupid. And it was funny to us. But that being said, because of that memory, he has a very fond place in my heart. And Specimen 11 is very fun and easy to draw because he's so simple. He is a very basic red demon with giant horns, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Specimen 11, once you find his room, is a very interesting location. As I said before, it is a McDonald's, and while you are in here, your object is very clear. You get into the meat cellar. In order to get into the meat cellar, you first have to go to the back, find a key, use that key, open the back office, go into the bathroom, find the key in the bathroom, leave the bathroom, go to the play place, go into the play bin. You have to go into the play tunnels, which is terrifying. Find the meat room, which has a giant hook oozing from the bottom. Go out, go to the left, go to the right, go to the main entrance corridor, go through the yellow side, find a key, walk out, come down the other end, go back, open the meat cellar, find the key, grab it, and leave. Once you leave the meat cellar, you will hear the song of the demon. Once the song starts playing, the chase has begun. Now, I'm going to be 100% honest. He's very generic. Specimen 11 is a basic red demon with no tail and fire between his giant bull-like horns, and that is it. The reason why I like Specimen 11 though is because of his lore. Around the building of this McDonald's Arby's play place, you'll find notes, and if you read these notes, they will tell you that people ended up working at this establishment and then new management came under. New management started making new burgers and you weren't really told what was in them. People would eat the burgers, leave, come back hours later and eat more burgers, eat them, leave, come back later the same day and order more and more and more, like they had some addictive substance, until eventually the people that ate them died. The person that is writing these notes eventually says he didn't have food one day for lunch, so he tries to eat one of the burgers himself and dies. He gets into a car crash after having an hallucination, and he says that he definitely didn't hit anything because there was nothing in front of him, so he must have hit an animal. And he said maybe it was a deer, however there's no such thing as a deer that would have left an imprint like that. So it's heavily implied that by eating this food, you are opening yourself up to being attacked from Specimen 11. Now, continuing on to the chase, Specimen 11 will hunt you down throughout the corridors, and he is blindingly fast. He's about 80% speed of the player, which is pretty significant because unlike the player, this man will clip through walls, and he does this to a annoying degree. It doesn't matter if the walls are on the same floor or not, he will clip through them and spawn in on the other side. Not only that, he hides the doors from you, so if you don't memorize the layout of every room of his, you won't know how to leave, because from your perspective, it just looks like an empty room with no door. Now, occasionally you will catch the door disappearing and you'll know where to go, but more often than not, you are left entirely on your own. Eventually, the chase will end as he kills you, and you'll be dragged away to a corridor filled with the red meat. You can walk around the corridor several times, spiraling in on itself, and eventually you'll be greeted by the demon, at which point you'll be assimilated. From here, text appears on the screen which reads, With every bite took bone and skin, the temple groaned and shook again. The dwelling place I did neglect until his end took bad effect. After that, you were assaulted by a string of binary which directly translates to, believe in God but question the teachings of men. This is something that was heavily debated back in the day when Specimen 11 first came out, however there's no real significant meaning here. The first line is a reference to the demon himself and how he turns people into food, which is where the meat comes from. Therefore, every bite took bone and skin, the temple groaned and shook again. Temple groaning refers to the body being a temple, as indicated by the Bible, and groaned and shook again is hunger. His dwelling place I did neglect refers to the temple itself, as in, I'm neglecting his hunger, until the end took bad effect, meaning he neglected his hunger so long he died of starvation, and that is how the demon came to be. Now the second line being, believe in God but question the teachings of men, is completely irrelevant to the first half. The reason why that was shoehorned in there is because the developer of the game, Kira, claimed that he felt like he had the need to put some religious text in the game because he was a Christian, or he is or was a Christian, but he ended up hiding it in binary anyway, so it didn't matter. The reason why I think this is so interesting is because the food demon is very obviously an analogy to modern day working force. And while I could talk about that for ages, I think Kira himself explains it a lot better in an interview he did with Wombu. So if you do like this video, I will link Wombu's video and his interview with Kira in the comment section below, so you can go watch his shit. It's really good, and I highly suggest you watch it because it puts in perspective a lot of the things I've said in this video. Moving on, eventually you will outrun Specimen 11 and you will be introduced to Specimen 12. Specimen 12 is a giant, fully mansionized structure that is painted and displayed to look the exact same. Now, if we talk about this specimen in detail, we will be here all day, but I will pretty much summarize it as this. You wander through a giant mansion replica, slowly unlocking doors as you go. Eventually, you'll find your way into the cellar, at which point you will be encountered with the real specimen itself. As you go throughout the encounter beforehand, you have to hide from him, but after you get the final key and you get the way to exit, you are done, you have to run. Specimen 12 is very notorious because he has rubber banding AI, which means essentially he'll either walk really slowly or he will bolt at you at full speed, but unlike most other specimens in the game, Specimen 12 runs at you dead speed and roars when he does it. So eventually he'll be walking really slow, you'll hear a loud growl, which is your indication that he's gunning it, at which point you know to turn around and run. Now I'm going to be 100% honest. I don't like this specimen at all. I hate this specimen. This is one of the weaker specimens in the game. He's boring. I don't like the fact you have to hide from him. He's not scary. He's an old man that talks about how lonely he is and how he can smell me, which is a bit creepy. Don't particularly care for that. And his jump scare is boring. Have I ever died to him? No. Not a single time have I ever died to Specimen 12. Actually, one time, because I went AFK while I was in the mansion. I didn't know he could just randomly walk in. But other than that, he's pretty boring. There's not really much to talk about. He does have a jump scare and a death animation, but it's just his face. It's nothing unique. There is some lore about him, which talks about how he is actually a possessor, not really the main host. So the body you see is not actually his body. He's just possessing the former person that came before him, which is explained through the notes. But again, it's nothing so interesting that I feel the need to dwell on it, so we'll just skip ahead. Eventually, after getting past this boring old man, you are introduced to Specimen 13, who, once again, I do not like. Specimen 13 is an obvious reference to K-Unk, or as most people know him, the water monster from Insomnia, which was once again a very, very popular horror media back in the 2010s era. And I can understand why having him being the final homage to Spooky Sass and Jump Scares can be interesting, but it is not fun gameplay. The way Specimen 13's room work is you enter into this abandoned old research facility that studied whales. You will explore for a while, you'll find this cold, darkened room, find the key code, find a lantern, unlock the code, open the door, turn on the water drainer, walk out, leave, turn to the right, turn to the left, walk to the main exit, and boom, there she is, sitting on a crate, looking all hot and shit, is a mermaid or a siren. The chase is very simple. Once you get close to her, she will jump into the water, and she will be indicated by loud splashing. From there, your job is simple. Stand on the boxes, wait for her to swim away, walk forward, stand on another box, wait for her to swim away. It is boring. It is one of the most boring game mechanics in the whole game, not because I think that she's a bad design, but because 90% of the time you're just standing on a box, waiting for her to go away, slowly trucking through water, and then repeating it again and again and again. Matter of fact, it is very, very hard to die to Specimen 13. The only way you're going to die to Specimen 13 is if you just didn't know you had to stand on the boxes, because she does no damage. She does almost no damage to you. I think it'll take her maybe 4 hits to kill you, maybe 3, which sounds like a lot, but when you could just stand on a box for the whole time and be completely invincible to Specimen 13, it makes her a very boring fight. Again, if you just made it to where the water was a little bit lower and I didn't have to very slowly trek through it, it'd be a lot more tolerable because I could just force my way out, because it's not interesting just to be standing there. Of course, if she kills you, you get a death animation where it shows that, oh my god, she wasn't actually a pretty lady, she's a horrifying lady, and she drowns you and kills you and that's it. Honestly, I feel like Specimen 13 should have been far earlier in the game, maybe Specimen 4 instead, swap her and Specimen 4, because Specimen 4 would have been a very proper ending, but I digress. I'm not here to talk about the game design of what should have been where, but personally, Specimen 13 is probably one of the weakest enemies in the game. But that's okay, because if you noticed earlier, we're not ending on a low note. I skipped Specimen 9, who actually reveals himself to be the final boss. Once you progress further through the game, you will get to the final room, room 1000, at which point one of 3 things can happen. As for which of these occur, it is entirely dependent upon how you played the game. Most people will play through the game with jump scares on, but if you're too much of a bitch, you can go into the main menu and disable jump scares. If you do this, there is a high probability that you will make it through the whole game without seeing a single monster, at which case you will get to the final room, and because there's no monsters because you turned off jump scares, there's no Specimen 9 to attack you, at which point Spooky will fly through the floor, throw you a surprise party that's very sad, and she'll send you off on your way. You'll walk out and they'll tell the story of how somehow you managed to survive the mansion, and boom, you're done, you beat the game, congratulations, you bitch! Now you need to go back through the whole game again, turn jump scares on, and when you get to the final room, one of 2 more things can happen, at which point you will be encountered with a giant open room with a screensaver. It looks like the outside. It plays birds chirping, but eventually the screen will break and it will shatter and an error notice will pop up, at which point Spooky will come outside and tell you that her screensaver quit working. Then she will then open a final door as a test to see if you're willing to leave, if you're ready to leave. Go through the door, and you will be taken to a white room. Here you will find a very interesting play area followed by a white note and a recorder talking about something that is unintelligible. We have no clue what they're referring to. Step a little bit further and you'll find a door plated with the number 731. Now, I could go on and talk about the implications of this number for a long time, but I feel like it's gonna be lost on most people. All you need to know is that room 731 is a reference to Unit 731, which was a place in Japan that did horrible human experiments. So, Unit 731 being his room number is a huge deal because it has the implications that the final specimen is one of their victims. As you walk into the room, you are encountered with Specimen 9's head. Now, I didn't say this earlier, but at any point in the game, you can encounter Specimen 9. You will either encounter him through an infinite hallway, which will eventually close in on you and introduce you to the lovely jump scare that I will play in the background now, or you can find him by standing idle in a room for 2 minutes, at which point he will attack you. He stalks you in secrecy throughout the entire game, and now here he sits as the final boss in the final room, ready to kill you. And it is a very interesting fight, because he starts the battle by finally finding the rest of his filleted body. Now, instead of being just a head, he's a giant, large, skinned red man who will throw all sorts of random shit at you. Obviously, it's not threatening, it's not at all a hard fight, because you can easily circle around him, roll around him, and all you really need to do is like an old school Ganondorf method is smack his attacks back at him, knock him on the floor, smack him a few times, at which point he will die. Now, that's Specimen 9, what about the endings? Well, as I said earlier, it depends. The method for getting here will be the same whether or not you attacked people or not. If you hit people with the axe, you will get here. If you didn't hit people with the axe, you will get here. What is important is what happens afterwards. If you have the good ending, the wall will cave in. If it caves in on one side, you die. Kinda. You die, but Spooky will tell you that you are an amazing troop for making it this far, and now she finally has enough troops to invade, at which point she will rise to the top of the ghost chamber, tell all of her troops how they're going to raid the world, and then the game ends. However, if you use the axe too many times, Spooky will tell you that you're an amazing beast and you fought off those enemies really hard, and you'll make a fine specimen, at which point you are turned into Specimen 14, the axe-wielding maniac that wanders around the mansion murdering people for getting in their way. And that's it. That's the end of the game. You win. After that, the credits roll, and then boom, you're done. And thank God, so am I. This video was 43 minutes long. I don't know how I'm gonna edit all of this. Shit. I guess it's giving me way more respect for people that make 4.5 hour long videos like Tro, but damn, man. That all being said, ladies and gentlemen, A, subscribe, because fuck, and B, if you really like this video, you need to go play the game. You can buy the original game for free right now on Steam, or you can play the HD renovation, which has all the DLC included, for about $20. And I highly recommend you buy the HD renovation game because it is an amazing game. It is one of my favorite games of all time. I really do enjoy this property, and I highly recommend it to everybody, even if you're not a fan of horror games. If you're not a fan and you don't like being scared, well, congratulations, this game has something for you. It's intriguing, it's alluring, it's not at all terrifying. If you are a fan of horror games, then you're still gonna enjoy it because you'll get the references, you'll understand the concepts, and there's a lot of things that I left out. I didn't tell you about everything, I only told you about the main specimens. There's other things you'll find throughout the game, major pieces of information like Easter eggs and junk. I highly recommend those of you that are still intrigued and you want more Spooky's content, please go play the game, support developers like Kira. He is easily one of the greatest horror game developers we have nowadays, and if we support the actually good properties, maybe there's a chance we'll stop getting garbage and trash like Garten of Banban, because oh my lord, that game is ass. But yeah, that's about it, ladies and gentlemen. Like the video, like. If you dislike it, dislike it. If you're like me, why not subscribe? But other than that, this has been my childhood, and I'm gonna go edit this 4.5 hour long video.